President Biden's accomplishments so far. Biden is the most pro-union president since FDR. No president has ever visited a picket line except Biden. 2. Biden has repeatedly forgiven student loan debt from many Americans. He is responsible for forgiving $137 billion for over 3.7 million student loan borrowers over the first 3 years of his presidency. 3. Biden's Inflation Reduction Act is reducing the cost of many prescription drugs. No president has ever done this. Thanks to Biden, Medicare finally has the ability to negotiate fair drug prices with pharmaceutical companies. He's also forcing pharmaceutical companies to issue rebates if they raise drug prices more than the rate of inflation. 4. The infrastructure law, the largest in U.S. history at $1 trillion in total, funds 32,000 specific projects across 4,500 communities in all 50 states, of which there is $220 billion for airports, rail, ports, roads and bridges, transit, electric vehicle charging, EV batteries plus critical materials, clean water improvements, Superfund cleanup projects, and much more. It also includes $470 billion for private sector manufacturing and clean energy investments, which is bringing back manufacturing jobs to the U.S. that don't require a 4-year degree. 5. The CHIPS and Science Act was also a Biden law that provided funding to bring semiconductor manufacturing back to the U.S. 6. Biden enacted a historic expansion of benefits and services for toxic exposed veterans from toxic burn pits. 7. Biden got the Safer Communities Act passed. That is the first major piece of gun safety legislation in 3 decades. It requires people 18 to 21 years of age to undergo mandatory enhanced background checks and expands mental health services in schools and supports school safety. 8. Issued executive orders protecting reproductive rights. 9. Biden initiated the process to reschedule marijuana to a much lesser federal offense and issued pardons for all prior federal offenses of marijuana possession. Biden officially ended the COVID pandemic. President Biden officially ended the COVID pandemic April 11th, 2023. But throughout the pandemic, he supported workers with extra unemployment checks, made sure vaccines were widely available at no charge, and let renters temporarily forego rent payments, as well as foregoing student loan payments for student loans. Childhood poverty was cut in half by implementing the American Rescue Plan, thanks to Biden. 12. Imposed a 15% minimum corporate tax on large corporations, many of which paid zero tax in previous years. 13. Rejoined the Paris Agreement that Trump withdrew from. This is obviously related to climate change and requires that the U.S. Meet certain goals and targets. 14. Created more jobs in 1 year, 6.6 million, than any other president in the United States history. 15. Reduced health care premiums under the Affordable Care Act by $800 per year. Biden halted all federal executions after Trump reinstated them after a 17-year freeze. 17. Reversed the Trump travel ban from mostly Muslim countries. 18. Biden ended the federal use of private prisons. Ended Trump's ban on transgender Americans joining the military. 20. Raised the minimum wage of all federal contract workers to $15 an hour from the previous $10.95 an hour. 21. Promoted and expanded access to voter registration and participation by an executive order. 22. Stopped Trump's separation of families at the border policy. He also attempted to pass meaningful immigration reform in a bipartisan bill that would have capped the numbers of immigrants allowed to enter the country and would have provided funding to hire thousands of new border agents and judges and reduce the time for immigration cases from 6 years to 6 months. But Trump told his MAGA legions not to do anything on the border because it would make Biden look good. So Republican Speaker Johnson promptly refused to bring the bill up for a vote, thereby killing the bill. This is disgraceful. 23. Rescinded the ban on U.S. government funding for foreign nonprofits that perform or promote abortions. 24. Reestablished the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology that Trump previously ended. It's important things to understand regarding the 2017 Trump tax cuts, which are a continuation of trickle-down economics that was the philosophy initiated in roughly 1980 when Reagan became president, where they cut the taxes of the super wealthy and expect that money to trickle down to the workers. It's never proven to be the case. This is another example. The GOP tax cuts in 2017. After that, there was a bonuses slumped by 22% for workers after that. Um, and following the bill's passage, a number of these corporations conveniently timed announcements that their workers would be getting raises or bonuses, but most of which never materialized. And if they did, they were actually less than they would have been getting, in the years before that. So um, this graph here shows that the tax cuts of 2017 did not cause a jump in bonuses. In fact, they declined significantly. Goes along with that article. This graph shows that the productivity and the compensation for typical workers from around 1950 to roughly 1973 pretty much tracked pretty close together, and then around from 1973 and then accelerating in 1980, even though productivity continued to rise sharply, the hourly compensation almost flatlined for the next 40 years. And this was, you know, another example of how this trickle-down economics that we've been going through the last 40 years it simply doesn't work. Another example here regarding the trickle-down economics, you can see from 1980 to 2015, the top 1% income rose by 242% roughly, where the rest of the country rose much, much less. So this graph also shows the same trend from around 1980 or just before that, the upper 1%, 95th percentile, let's say the top 5% continued to increase significantly, and the bottom 95% essentially flatlined. But it's interesting to think about, maybe what could be the reasons for this, because unions were strong in 1950 and taxes were high through the early 70s, and then taxes were cut on the wealthy significantly starting in the 70s, and unions were on the decline in the 70s, starting in the 70s, and then accelerating in the 80s and through till today. And I believe that combination is what explains this graph. Thank you for watching this presentation of Biden's major accomplishments during his presidency so far.